thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm really delighted to be here, and just as Ailsa and I are dressed similarly, I very much agree with what you said, and I think you'll see some kind of common themes. So for anybody who doesn't know who the Early Intervention Foundation is, we are both a charity and also one of the government's What Works centres. You've got NICE at one end, and we're a very small version of that, and we're there to support effective early intervention so that every child can fulfil their potential. And the way in which we work is that we are interested in generating knowledge and evidence, that it's very important to communicate and disseminate that through events like these and others. But in the end, we want to try to secure change, and that's through trying to catalyse and secure adoption. We were created actually with sort of roots in a number of different local areas, working with local authorities and their partners, or in some cases with the police and their partners. And I think that's very important to kind of root the organisation in reality. So that's who we are. I'm going to talk about two pieces of research, two evidence reviews. The first I'm only going to briefly talk about, and the second, which is very much focused on the early years, I'll spend a bit longer on. But this is something we've done recently, which is really, we see this as a missing piece of the jigsaw, that the way in which parents relate to each other, the quality of that relationship, is critically important to how a child fares. And in many senses, that's common sense. But actually, this inter-parental relationship, as we call it, has been somewhat neglected in some of the ways in which we deliver services. So I just talk briefly about this. We did a review on this interparental relationship. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but it's very important to improve outcomes for children. And we did it with both the Department for Work and Pensions and somebody who's on our evidence panel, who's called Professor Gordon Harold from Sussex. And we looked at scientific evidence underpinning the importance of this relationship, and we looked at some interventions available in the UK. And I just wanted to draw out some of the key findings, because I think it is important as you start to think about the perinatal period and the early childhood period. So the key finding is that it's the quality of the interparental relationship which matters, so not whether you're in one particular kind of relationship, together or separated. And how parents relate to each other is a primary influence on, in particular, children's mental health, but a range of other life chances, including academic attainment and physical health. And of course, we know this when we talk about violence. You talked about domestic violence, Ailsa, that if children are exposed to frequent and intense conflict, that's very damaging. But actually, importantly, there is a continuum from silence to violence. And the issue is if that conflict is not resolved. So we all row. Rowing is normal and arguing is normal, but children need to see you resolve conflict. And that's really the kind of key understanding. And many of the parenting interventions that are available, they will not be effective in the context of conflict between those adults. And so the implications for that are really that we do need to think, and it's difficult territory because it feels private territory, but we do need to think about how we can intervene to support that couple relationship, whether you're living in the same house or whether you're separated, in order to support the overall family functioning. And we need to think separately about the mother and child, the father and child, and how the parents co-parent together. So those are the kind of principal findings. I'm not going to go into the interventions, but they are available on our website. What we did is we did a very brief survey before we had our conference last year, just to get a sense of people who are in local services, how far they feel that services are using this kind of evidence. And what's interesting is that even if you take the top end, the parenting support, 30% of those delivering things to support parents felt that this dimension, the interparental relationship, was part of what they did. If you look at midwifery and health visiting at the other end, only 8% felt that this was a key feature. We did also ask people whether they thought it was important. There was near universal agreement that this was important, but a big gap between the sort of sense that this is really important and the services that are available. And much of this, of course, is delivered in the voluntary sector. So what we're doing with this important work is thinking about how do we actually apply the evidence in practice. We're also looking at a particular focus in terms of thinking about disadvantage and risks of poverty with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and then really working with some local areas about how we start to shift the culture, equipping people, whether they may not be delivering something called relationship services, they just are engaging with families. How do we equip them to address this missing piece of the jigsaw? So I wanted to tell you briefly about that. What I'm going to spend more of my time on is a review that we did called Foundations for Life, and it is all in the title. And we focused on what works to support parent-child interaction in the early years. We looked at 75 programmes being delivered in the UK. And the focus, as I said, is very much on the early years, from conception to 5. And Family Partnerships amongst the other 74 was part of it. And we focused on 3 outcomes: attachment, behaviour, and cognitive development. And of course, they are overlapping. And this dynamic relationship between the parent and child during those first 5 years, as you all know, that's why you're here sitting in the audience, can have not only an immediate impact, but a very long-term impact on children's future development. A sort of critical dimension and lesson is, as exactly as Ailsa described, in terms of how you're thinking about adapting the programme, that one size doesn't fit all. And so thinking about the exact developmental stage, so age and developmental stage of the child, as in the left, is critically important. And then also understanding the level of need from universal specialists. We didn't look at specialist programmes because we're an early intervention foundation, but clearly they're very important. Then we have these other 2 categories. People have different names for this depending on what sector they're in. Targeted selective, so the risk by population, and a signal of risk, what we've called targeted indicated. So bearing that in mind is very important. This is how we did our programme assessment, and this is a ladder, but very importantly, again, just as Ailsa explained very clearly, that sometimes you get a study which shows that it's had no effect. So it may be a very good study and it's not what you expected or would have wanted, but it's incredibly important that evidence it's a journey and it's a cycle. And the important thing is what you extract from the evaluations you do in order to improve what you're delivering, in order to make a difference to children's outcomes. And so we have a set of evidence standards that go from not yet level 2, so those are there at an earlier stage of development, right the way to 4, which is when you would have had at least 2 high-quality evaluations. So those are usually randomized control trials or quasi-experimental designs. And you also have a long-term impact for more than 1 year. So it is a stringent, at the top it is stringent. And I know that some of the organisations we've worked with have found that hard. But we wanted to see whether things actually translated into child outcomes at the end. Importantly, we also do a relative rating of cost, not the actual cost, but given the inputs, we rate programmes according to whether they're at a low cost level at 1 or at 5. But I think very important, and I haven't got the diagram here, is evidence of impact, of course, is important, but it is one dimension. And implementation, the implementation context, if you've got the right people in the right places, what your population needs are, and so on, is also absolutely critical. And then, of course, the cost benefit is critical as well. Resources are always finite. They're particularly finite at the moment. So that's our evidence scale. This is what we found. So we did 75 programmes. Just I'll draw that out a bit. The behavioural ones had stronger levels of evidence in terms of numbers of programmes at the higher end. That's probably because we've been we've got more programmes in that territory. The other two outcomes a bit less. Now, this is going to be a challenge. I hope I can. So you all know what attachment security is, and you have the Barbie room to explore that. But I just wanted to show you this because it's truly wonderful.
Keep talking, Dad.
This baby is something. There's something else. What are you saying? You see Grandpa? See Grandpa's feet? Oh, you're touching Grandpa's face. You touch Grandpa's face. Let's try it again. Oh, you touched my face. Yeah. How did that feel? Did you like that? Oh, now you're touching your own face. Yeah.
Djokovic downs Murray in Beijing semifinals.
I know. Djokovic beat Murray? Good. I don't like Murray either. I don't like Murray, but I like Djokovic.
Oh, wow.
Are you going to play tennis someday? Huh? Maybe you will. Well,
So that's it's actually the relative of one of the people who works with us. Who's did all the work. It's Kirsten's, I think, great niece, but kind of wonderful to witness. She's 6 weeks at this point, so which is very interesting. Attachment security. Most parents can manage attachment security pretty well. It's a minority that struggle. And as you kind of witnessed, that interaction with the child actually eliciting a response from the grandparent in this case helps to build that attachment, which in turn then helps when that child becomes an adult for them to build a similar kind of attachment with their own child. There are things that interfere with that, and you'd expect some of those things. So social disadvantage, single parenthood, unwanted pregnancies, age of the mother, so very, very young, targeted by FNP, relationship problems, mental health. All of those things may interfere with that relationship. This is what we found. So we looked at programmes across these three. Those were the number of programs that we looked at, different interventions at these different levels of need. These are the ones that are evidence-based, so they have a rating of a 3 or a 4. The rating of 2 is preliminary evidence, so we're just looking at the ones that have evidence-based, i.e. we can attribute causality. It's because of the intervention, it's not because of something else that's going on. This is what we found. So 5 had evidence of impact on child outcomes. We found 2 that had no effect. And it's really important to say it doesn't mean they never will have an effect, but very useful learning from those. And that really says the same thing. But just to say, there is still a really high need for these, especially for targeted interventions that are helping children and families where that attachment is not operating, likely to be for a longer time and higher cost, but with potential high impact. So just moving on, let's just a quick look at the terrible twos.
Tiana, give Kailani. Give Kailani. Take it.
So some of us have all been through that, although it's a while ago for me, personally and as a mother. So just to note, I mean, that's totally normal behaviour at a certain stage, and it subsides usually. Of course, in some cases it doesn't. So we shouldn't necessarily worry. So the journey to enable children to self-regulate. So, of course, how parents either reinforce and manage that behaviour is incredibly important. So the kinds of programmes that are available is to support parents learn effective strategies to manage that behaviour, and then in turn children are able to self-regulate. And the kinds of things that interfere can be the child's own temperament, language delays, and actually if you're responding in the wrong way. And this is what we found very quickly. These were the number of programmes that we looked at. We had a higher number that were evidence-based, and we found 2 with no effect in this territory. And I think only the thing to draw out here is sometimes that actually non-compliant behaviour problems are difficult to prevent, a solely preventative strategy. That's because of the fact that actually it's normal behaviour for a certain phase, and also that parents need to get better at it, need to practice it. So programmes tend to be quite low cost because they're often group-based programmes, but plenty of choice there. Very quickly, cognitive development, we did it. It was a smaller area of study for us, and I think we need to supplement that, and we're doing some work on early language development. But again, this cognitive zone in which children can learn key concepts and the way in which parents can help scaffold their learning through interaction is really key. So we know there's a big social class, socioeconomic gap here, but of course language delays can happen at all levels of income. And what did we found? I cut the video out because I thought it would be too long. Those are the number of programmes we looked at. We found 2, well, in total 5, that had evidence of impact. So interestingly, Family Nurse Partnership, again, as Asa said, has got some really interesting and significant impacts on child development, even though it's not been in operation for that long. So, again, some good evidence. We think we need to do some more work in this territory. Home visiting can play a really important role, but it needs to be sustained. And again, programmes medium to high cost. So, headline findings. There are a range of effective and proven programmes. Implementing it is challenging and complex. We had more evidence to support behavioural development. The age of about 2.5 is absolutely critical point for intervention for behaviour. We had less evidence on attachment than we had thought we would have. Maternal mental health is absolutely critical. Gap in the early learning programmes. We need to think about both the role of what's happening at home in combination with settings. We found, this is not to say that universal programmes don't work, but we found the evidence was strongest for those programmes that targeted early signals of risk in child development. Key message for us, and again it bears out the earlier messages, we need to test, learn and adapt. These things are not set in concrete, and somehow thinking about how do you embed that in our practice, even though many of you, I don't know how many of you are frontline practitioners or leading services, have got many, many things to do, but data, if we can use data to provide insights into how we deliver services, there are real gains to be had. So just to say, if you want to know more about anything that I've talked about, we're having a national conference on the 11th of May. I do hope you'll come. Thank you.